Welcome to this third video in our series looking at reflective writing. This final video looks at different types of reflective assignments and shows some examples of reflective writing, both good and bad. There are many assessment activities that require reflective writing, and here are just a few. We'll look in more detail at a few of the most common. So if you're asked to keep a learning journal or a reflective diary, you'll start by informally recording incidents, thoughts and feelings, however painful, as soon as possible after the event. So if you're on a placement, for example, keep those informal notes as you go along so you don't forget any detail or incidents. These can be rough and ready, especially if the experience was a difficult one. You don't always want to dwell on it until you put a little space between yourself and what happened. But do this as soon as possible after the event so you don't forget things. Then, when you're getting ready to write the journal entries for the assessment, check the learning outcomes of your assignment and select the experiences that are the best examples to cover those. You should read around the theory related to that experience at this point too, so you can start to develop arguments for the more formal write-up. That means that when you're ready to write those formal journal entries, you're in a calmer, more informed place, and your entries will be much richer, representing positive learning experiences. If you're asked to write a reflective essay, or again a reflective journal in health and social care or education, they're often about particular incidents or processes. So it starts with you participating in or observing an incident or process, and you would describe that in your writing, briefly. You'll then discuss what went well, what not so well. You'll analyse it by thinking about it more, writing about your thoughts about that, by linking that to relevant theory, which could be local or national policies or guidance, as well as findings in academic journals and the experiences of others. And you would reflect on how this links to your own experiences and how it could inform your future practice. Reflective essays or reports are also often about your learning process. So what are you learning? It's why you're here after all. In assignments, only a brief description needs to be written about what you're learning, as your lecturer knows the topic already. You will be reflecting on how you are learning. We don't simply absorb information. Reflect on how you learn best so you can keep doing it. You could write about how you are using what you are learning. Seeing the use and value of what you're learning is a fantastic motivator. You can reflect on what your strengths and weaknesses in learning are. Knowing these strengths and weaknesses can help you identify areas to focus on. This can be for both improving your weaknesses and maximising your strengths. It can be good to think and to write about what your learning priorities are. There are many aspects to defining your learning priorities. You may wish to focus on certain areas to achieve your desired grade. You could be matching requirements for your future career goals. Or perhaps you're sticking to your strengths or interests. You can reflect on how you can improve and build upon your learning process. The more time you put into figuring out how you learn and what works for you, the easier you will find your studies moving forward. Maybe you have some short, medium or long-term goals. You can reflect on how well you're working towards those. There's no point in setting yourself goals if you do not have any checks in place to see if you're succeeding. Use reflection to keep checking on your progress and revise your goals if you need to. And finally, you're going to write about how your reflection can inform future practice. This works for all disciplines, from scientists devising a new approach for experimentation to nurses devising ways to improve their patient care. In most reflective assignments, you need to link theory with practice. Theory represents your reading, and when you're reflecting, you use that to help explain the practice. The diagram here shows how you can do this in either direction. That is, you can introduce the theory and then show how your experience relates to that. So on the example here, we're starting with the WHO guidelines define the key moments for hand hygiene. and then you show how you can apply this idea or use it to explain or identify the relevance in something. So then the practice bit comes in. In my community placement, staff did not have access to hand washing facilities, and you're going to go on to discuss that in more detail. Or you can start by introducing the experience or the incident and then explain how the theory is helpful in understanding why it happened like it did or what needs to be changed. So again, looking at the example here, we've got our lack of leadership resulted in meetings being overly relaxed. You then use that experience to provide evidence, ask questions, create curiosity about things. So going off and then finding that theory, and you've got the piece there, effective leadership requires a confident and appropriate use of power. This short video shows another way to think about this as waves.
Reflective writing tasks commonly expect you to connect theories or concepts from research to concrete experiences with examples of what people do, say, think and feel. These can be your experiences or those of others, such as those described in research. When you can clearly match theory with concrete experiences, you show you understand the theory or concept you're writing about. One way to organize your writing is to think of waves. Waves can be different lengths. The following 3 examples will show you waves in a paragraph. This wave starts with theory and then shifts down to concrete experience. For example, here the concept of maturation is connected to Ruby and the example of putting on shoes. So, the theory comes first in this example. Then a link is made to a child's experiences. The experiences that are described focus on details of the child's physical development. This is a good example because the writer clearly matches concrete examples with theory. Another option is to start with concrete experience and then shift up to theory. Here the example of Ruby trying to put on her shoes is related to the concept of maturation. The concrete experiences from the child's physical development come first. These are then linked to theory. Again, there is a clear match between the examples and the theory. A third option is the full wave. Here, Erikson's theory is related to joining a football team. This experience is also related to Kohlberg's theory. So, there are 2 theories and both are related to an experience of playing school sport. So the details of one experience are used to show understanding of 2 different theories. Use language to make smooth links between theory and experience. Here's some wording for starting to go down the wave. And here's some wording for starting to go up the wave. So you have different options, and your job is to clearly match experiences with theory. These are general guidelines only. Check your assignment instructions.
So here is some typical feedback seen in student assignments. What will you change? Too descriptive. Is this just your opinion? You haven't really used the reflective model. What are you basing your changes on? By far the most common is too descriptive. Most early attempts at reflective writing are just too descriptive. Descriptive writing just relates what happened or sometimes what you've read, answering questions like those shown here. What, when, who, where. Reflective writing asks and answers deeper questions. Why did I think that? Why does it matter? How can I change things? So what can I learn from that experience? So what might be the consequences of change? And some of the reflective models and frameworks we looked at in the previous video prompt you with these sorts of questions. You don't get many marks for description, so keep that bit as short as possible. It is needed because you've got to put your reflection into context, but just keep it to the minimum. You can see here little bits of description, lots of reflection. Little bits of description, lots of reflection. Reflective writing requires a move away from the usual analytical style of academic writing. So, if we look at this table, analytical writing is based on a broad reading of the subject areas, using reason to develop an argument, whereas reflective writing is much more personal. It's looking at those personal responses to experiences, events, ideas and information. We're used to our analytical writing being objective and written in an impersonal style, usually the third person, whereas reflective writing is definitely subjective and has a personal style and is written in the first person. Analytical writing examines strengths and weaknesses of theories, arguments and the research of others. It compares and contrasts ideas and theories, whereas reflective writing is looking for meaning and analyses the significance of personal responses to experiences and events, using theory to understand and advise. Analytical writing is usually limited to academic evidence, whereas reflective writing is not limited to academic evidence because you can bring in all sorts of things that have affected your understanding and your experiences. And finally, analytical writing presents and justifies a position, whereas reflective writing is looking for solutions and recommendations. I'll now look at some examples of reflective writing. So here's one piece. Do pause the video so you can read it. It starts with a good topic sentence setting the scene. It then goes on with some observations and first impressions, and then the real reflection comes where it's linking theory to practice. This isn't complete though, as it does not say what the writer would change about their own practice. Here's another example. Again, please pause the video to read it. This time it starts with a clear statement of the outcome of reflection. It then goes on to show how theory translates to practice, and this one does indicate what should happen next. It could still be improved though, with information about how they could address their prejudices. Here's an example of a poor piece of reflective writing. Pause the video to read it. See how much description there is. It's nearly all green, so it's nearly all description. A lot of it isn't actually relevant to the learning involved either. They do talk about it being really annoying, so there's some feeling, but it's a bit abstract. And they have at the end thought a little bit about the future, but again, that's quite cursorily covered. Here's a much better example of that same event. Again, please pause to read it through. So with this one, you can see the description is kept to a minimum. Really just that first sentence and a little bit later on. There's quite a lot of writing there about how they felt and why they made decisions. It's bringing in theory and it's looking to the future in a little bit more detail. So this is a much better version. And I'm going to finish this video with this final point. And it's a very important one because you have to understand that reflective writing is for the writer, not the reader. Yes, it's being assessed, but ultimately it needs to be useful. Don't think you're doing it just as a chore, just to get through this assignment. Think about how you can actually use it to improve what you do, to transform your learning and your practice. If it's useful to you, it will be good for your assessor too. So it's a win-win situation. Thank you for watching. Please do go to our Reflective Writing Skills Guide for more information and useful links.